Today is Thursday, November 20th, 2025. The kind of morning that doesn't just break at fractures. Manhattan wakes up under a sky so heavy it looks like it's sinking, and for the first time in years, the world stops pretending that Sean Diddy Combs still holds the power he once wielded like a weapon. Black vans line the side of the SDNY courthouse, as if the city itself is bracing. Reporters crushed together behind barricades, hands trembling over record buttons, waiting for the moment they all knew was coming, but hoped they'd never witness. Because today isn't a hearing, it isn't an update, it isn't a press moment. Today is the day a legacy collapses in real time, and every camera on earth is pointed toward the building where one man's past is about to be ripped open again. Only this time, there's no stage, no music, no crowd chanting his name, just justice and the cold echo of consequence. Before we go deeper into this unbelievable twist, tell me in the comments, do you think the system waited too long to expose the truth? And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a breaking update like this. The courthouse doors swing open, and the air inside shifts instantly, as if tension has mass. Officers stand stiff, their eyes forward. Cassie sits behind her attorneys, fingers laced together so tightly the knuckles have gone white. Every seat is filled. Every breath is shallow, and at exactly 9:00 a.m., Diddy steps inside, wrists chained, eyes hollow. He doesn't smile. He doesn't scan the room to see who's watching. He already knows the world is watching, and for the first time, he looks like a man who can feel the walls closing in. As he sits, the murmuring fades until the room sinks into a silence so sharp it cuts. Judge Subramanian enters with a single page in his hand, just one. But that one sheet has already changed the course of the entire case. Cassie's legal team spent the whole night wrestling with something no one saw coming. Sealed files, authenticated by the FBI, documenting a trail of intimidation so detailed it almost feels unreal. Witness pressure, hush money, altered digital logs, and recordings ones the public never knew existed. Evidence that had been buried deep enough that even the defense believed it would never surface again. Until now. The judge sits. No one moves. No one even clears their throat. This court, he begins, voice steady but wired with tension, will now address new material evidence submitted in the matter of United States versus Combs. Pens begin flying over notepads. Phones tilt upward. Cassie lifts her chin slowly, as if preparing herself to relive the nightmare she spent years trying to escape. The prosecutor slides a black folder across the table, the federal seal stamped in red. The judge breaks the seal and begins to read. His expression shifts not dramatically, not theatrically, but in the smallest micro twitches that only the people in the front row can see. Anger, disbelief, something heavier. These materials, he says, indicate continued interference by the defendant, even after sentencing. The words echo, ricocheting through the room like a warning shot. Diddy leans back, but there's no swagger left. His cuffs clink nervously as his fingers twitch. His attorney, Mark Agnafalo, rises instantly, as if stepping into a burning room. Your Honor, this cannot be treated as legitimate evidence without review. Sit down, counselor, the judge replies sharply. You'll have your opportunity, but your client is about to hear something he spent years avoiding. The prosecutor opens the folder and pulls out the first stack screenshots, digital transfers, message logs, offshore accounts linked directly to Diddy's known shell companies. Payments routed through entertainment entities that never existed on paper. Conversations written in half phrases designed to hide intent, but not well enough. The gallery gasps softly. Cassie exhales shakily, her eyes on nothing but the documents. These are communications, the prosecutor says, between the defendant and intermediaries who were instructed to suppress, intimidate, and manipulate witness statements between June and September 2025. Another wave of murmurs ripples through the courtroom. Suppression after conviction. It's the kind of accusation that feels too wild to be real, but the paper trail is right there, in black and white. Diddy shakes his head slowly, lips parting. They can't take more from me, he mutters under his breath. But even he knows that isn't true, because this time, the part of the story he thought he controlled is slipping out of his hands. The prosecutor sets down a hard drive, small, sealed, labeled. This, he continues, is the missing digital archive connecting Mr. Combs directly to the payments and threats delivered toward multiple federal witnesses. The judge motions. Proceed. The clerk inserts the drive. The speakers hum. A heartbeat of silence, then a voice cold, sharp, unmistakable. Handle it. I don't want any surprises in front of that judge. The words crawl through the room like ice water. People shift. Cassie closes her eyes. Diddy's shoulders stiffen. Agnafilo leaps up. Your Honor, that audio could be spliced. There is no guarantee of authenticity. The judge raises a hand. The FBI's Digital Forensics Division verified it less than 12 hours ago. Sit down. For the first time, Diddy looks truly undone. That voice wasn't taken from an interview, or a call, or a security system. It was taken from a private device he thought he'd wiped clean years ago. The bravado that once defined him crumbles in the stale courtroom air. Cassie's attorney whispers, barely audible, this changes everything. And it does, because every sentence, every dollar, every threat documented in those files adds weight to the truth the judge is now forced to confront. The prosecutor lays out the bank trail transfer by transfer. Anonymous accounts, repeated patterns, timelines aligned perfectly with witness withdrawals and mysterious disappearances. Each reveal slams into the room like another nail sealing a box shut. Reporters scramble, pens scratch louder. Someone in the back whispers, this isn't a hearing. This is an autopsy. Diddy shifts forward, breathing fast, eyes darting. Finally, he speaks. You don't know what it's like. Everyone wants a piece of you. They lie, they twist, they build stories to tear you down. The judge looks at him steadily. Then tell me, Mr. Combs, who transferred those funds? Who made those payments? Who spoke those words on tape? Silence. A silence so deep the walls seem to absorb it. Cassie wipes a tear quietly. The prosecutor closes the folder. The judge folds his hands. The weight of everything hangs thick in the air. And though no one says it aloud, everyone in that courtroom knows one truth. By the time this day ends, Sean Diddy Combs may not be fighting for months. He may be fighting for the rest of his life. The courtroom was so quiet it felt unnatural, like the air itself was waiting to see which direction fate would bend. Judge Subramanian sat with the new evidence in front of him, his fingers pressed together, his expression unreadable. Every person in the gallery leaned forward as if pulled by an invisible thread. Even the lights above seemed muted, casting long shadows across the floor as if marking the end of something, the beginning of something else. Diddy shifted in his seat, the cuffs clinking in a rhythm that betrayed his nerves. For a man who once controlled every room he walked into, he now looked like someone struggling to breathe in a place where power held no currency. His eyes bounced between the judge, the prosecutors, and the sealed evidence bag that sat on the corner of the table like a ghost waiting to be acknowledged. The prosecutor rose again, this time holding a brown envelope thick enough to make the gallery murmur. Your Honor, he said, voice steady, we have additional material that corroborates the digital archive. He handed it to the clerk. Screenshots, deleted messages. Financial strings that tied themselves back to the same offshore accounts mentioned earlier. But what caught everyone's attention were the handwritten notes, names circled, arrows pointing, phrases like done, clean, and secured scribbled in the margins. These notes, the prosecutor continued, belonged to one of Mr. Combs's intermediaries who has since agreed to cooperate. They outline the strategy used to silence 2 federal witnesses after the initial sentencing. A cold shiver rippled through the room. No one expected the case to spiral this deeply. No one expected that after the sentence was handed down, behind the scenes, a second darker narrative was still unfolding. Agnafilo jumped to his feet. Your Honor, we object to the presentation of unverified handwriting. The judge didn't let him finish. Counselor, sit down. The FBI verified the handwriting analysis this morning. His voice carried the kind of authority that shut down even the boldest courtroom theatrics. Agnafilo hesitated for a moment, then slowly lowered himself back into his seat, his face tightening as he realized the ground beneath him was disappearing inch by inch. Cassie sat still, her gaze fixed forward. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. Her expression carried something harder, something born from years of silence and fear. As the judge turned to the next page, she exhaled quietly, her breath trembling like she was trying not to relive memories she never asked to remember. The prosecutor stepped toward the bench with another document. Included in this evidence, Your Honor, are wire transfers dated within days of key testimony withdrawals. He tapped the paper. These transfers originate from shell corporations connected directly to Comedia Holdings. The judge's eyes narrowed. Everyone in the gallery knew what that meant. Direct financial ties, direct influence, direct interference. Diddy leaned toward Agnifilo. "We can argue intent," he whispered, trying to maintain control, but it sounded more like a plea than a strategy. Agnifilo didn't answer. His lips pressed into a thin line, his chest rising and falling with restrained frustration. Even he knew intent wasn't the lifeline Diddy thought it was. Motive, opportunity, timing, everything pointed to a pattern too deliberate to dismiss. The judge placed the papers down carefully, as if weighing every word printed on them. He looked at the prosecution. "Is there more?" "Yes, Your Honor," the prosecutor replied. "One final item." He reached into his case and produced a USB drive inside another sealed bag. The seal glinted sharply under the lights, and the gallery tensed as though something inside that small piece of plastic carried enough weight to break whatever resistance remained. "This drive," the prosecutor said, "contains internal emails and voice notes from an employee formerly employed by Mr. Combs. These materials were delivered to Cassie's legal team late last night. They were authenticated this morning by the FBI's cyber division." Every eye in the room focused on the judge as he motioned for the clerk. The file was inserted. The lights dimmed slightly. A faint hum filled the speakers again, and then a different voice emerged. Diddy's, not shouting, not commanding. Something worse, calculating. Cold. "Make sure the ones talking don't talk again. This can't come up. You understand me?" The words echoed. Heavy. Final. Each second of that audio dropped like lead into the room. Even the officers shifted, their eyes flicking toward Diddy with a mixture of disbelief and grim acknowledgement. Cassie's lips parted slightly, her breath catching in her throat. Her attorney rested a hand gently on her arm, a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. Diddy slammed his hands on the table, the chains rattling violently. "That's fake. All of it. They're twisting everything. This is a setup." The outburst ricocheted through the room. Officers stepped closer, ready. The judge remained completely still, letting the moment break over the courtroom like a wave. "Mr. Combs," he said finally, voice chillingly calm, "control yourself." But Diddy wasn't in control anymore. Not of his voice, not of his narrative, and certainly not of the evidence unraveling around him. "They're trying to destroy me," he muttered, half to the judge, half to himself. "They've always tried." The judge didn't react. He didn't blink. He didn't soften. "What destroys a man, Mr. Combs," he said quietly, "isn't the world. It's the choices he makes when he believes the world can't touch him." The room froze again. People exchanged glances, the heaviness of that statement settling across the gallery like dust. Cassie's shoulders lifted as she inhaled, fighting the emotion tightening her throat. The judge leaned back in his chair. "This court will take a brief recess to review the newly presented materials." He stood, giving the room one final measured look before stepping out through his private door. But even as he left, everyone inside knew the truth. Recess or not, pause or not, there was no turning back. Not for the court, not for Cassie, and certainly not for Sean "Diddy" Combs, who now sat hunched over the table, staring at the evidence that would soon decide the rest of his life. When the judge stepped out, the room didn't relax. It didn't breathe. It just waited. A low hum of whispers rippled in the gallery, but even those sounded restrained, like everyone was afraid their voice might somehow sway the walls listening around them. Officers straightened their belts. Reporters scribbled with frantic energy. Cassie's chest rose and fell slowly, trying to steady the storm building inside her. And in the middle of it all, Diddy sat motionless, eyes locked on the table as if the grain of the wood could offer him an escape he no longer had the power to claim. Agnifilo leaned toward him, voice hushed, desperate. Sean, you need to stop reacting. You're making this worse. But Diddy didn't look at him. His jaw was clenched, breath sharp and uneven. For a man who once commanded entire industries with a nod, he now looked like someone who knew the empire he built was cracking from the inside. Minutes felt like hours until the bailiff's voice finally echoed through the hall. All rise. The doors opened. Judge Subramanian walked back in with the same thin file, but now his expression carried a weight that hadn't been there before. He took his seat. The courtroom followed. The judge cleared his throat, the sound slicing through the silence. This court, he began, has reviewed the newly submitted evidence. His gaze swept across the gallery, then paused on Diddy, who didn't lift his eyes. These materials raise severe concerns regarding obstruction of justice, manipulation of witnesses, and interference with federal procedures. A thick tension settled over the room. Cassie clasped her hands tighter. The prosecutor straightened. Agnifilo blinked rapidly, as if bracing for impact. Your Honor, Agnifilo said quickly, rising again. The defense requests appropriate time to analyze these materials. We have not been given an denied, the judge snapped. This evidence was verified by federal investigators. The timeline of your client's actions does not allow for delay. Diddy's head twitched up at that, his eyes filled with something between fear and fury. The judge continued, voice steady but edged with steel. Mr. Combs, the court cannot ignore what has been uncovered. Your conduct while under federal sentencing review is not only unacceptable, it is unprecedented. Reporters leaned forward, fingers ready to capture every syllable. The prosecutor lifted another sheet of paper. Your Honor, the FBI's audit trail confirms that suppression payments continued even after the appeal filed on October 31st. A ripple of disbelief spread across the room. The timeline was damning. Too precise. Too recent. Too bold. Diddy shook his head slowly. This isn't real. This can't be real, he whispered, but his words dissolved into nothing. Cassie looked down, her hands trembling slightly. Not with triumph, not with relief, but with the exhaustion of someone who has carried a truth for too long and is watching the world finally see it too. The judge tapped his pen once, just once, but the sound cracked like thunder. Mr. Combs, he said, leaning forward, you were given an opportunity to present your appeal in good faith. Instead, you chose deception. You chose manipulation. You chose harm. The gallery was still, a stillness that didn't feel like calm, but like mourning for a career, for a legacy, for the illusion of a man who had shaped culture for decades. Agnifilo stepped forward again. Your Honor, with respect, the public pressure surrounding this case has created an imbalance. My client is being judged not by law, but by outrage. The judge cut him off sharply. Counselor, when a defendant tampers with witnesses and directs threats toward those cooperating with federal authorities, the law demands an immediate response. Public opinion has nothing to do with the facts. Diddy's breathing quickened. His hands tightened on the table. You don't understand, he said suddenly, his voice cracking. People out there want to see me fall. They want to destroy everything I built. The judge's eyes hardened. What you built, Mr. Combs, is not on trial. What you tried to hide is. The line sliced through the room like a blade. A few reporters froze mid-keystroke. Someone in the back lowered their phone, stunned. Diddy stared at the judge, his expression shifting from disbelief to something darker. A quiet, sinking realization. Like a man who finally sees the edge of a cliff he'd been walking toward blindfolded. The prosecutor placed one final folder on the bench. Your Honor, the FBI requests that all evidence presented today remain sealed due to the sensitivity of ongoing investigations. The judge nodded. So ordered. Cassie inhaled sharply. Her attorney placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her as the weight of the moment pressed down like gravity. Diddy leaned toward Agnifilo, his voice barely audible but trembling. They're framing me, right? This isn't real. You'll fix this. But Agnifilo didn't respond. His silence was louder than any argument he could offer. And in that silence, Diddy's face fell slack, like even he knew the truth he'd been running from had finally caught up. The judge placed the file down carefully, almost gently, as if acknowledging the end of something monumental. "This court," he said, his tone quieter but more powerful than it had been all day, "will proceed to final review and prepare a ruling." A collective breath pulled through the gallery. Outside the courtroom doors, reporters pressed their ears to the wood, waiting for even a fragment of what was unfolding inside. The judge stood. "This recess will be brief." He glanced at Diddy. "The consequences of your actions, Mr. Combs, will be addressed shortly." The gavel struck once, echoing like a closing chapter. As he walked out, the room didn't move. It didn't dare. Cassie wiped a single tear from her cheek, a tear not of victory, but of release, like a weight she had carried alone for far too long was finally being lifted piece by fragile piece. Officers surrounded Diddy again as he sank deeper into his chair. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at the prosecutors. His gaze was distant, hollow, fixed on some invisible point far beyond the courtroom walls. The cameras, the people, the noise, none of it mattered now. Because for the first time, he wasn't facing an accusation. He was facing the end. The murmurs grew louder as the minutes ticked by, each second stretching into something heavier, sharper, almost unbearable. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed like lightning against the gray afternoon sky. Crowds pressed against metal barricades, shouting, crying, filming, desperate for a glimpse of a moment that would no longer belong to one man, but to history itself. Inside, though, the courtroom felt frozen in a kind of suspended reality, as if time had slowed to match the beating hearts of everyone waiting for the judge to return. Cassie sat silently, her hands folded in her lap, her breath rising and falling with the rhythm of someone trying to steady themselves before a wave hits. Her attorney leaned in and whispered something softly, but she barely reacted. Her eyes were fixed on the empty bench at the front of the room, the place where everything would be decided. She had spent years carrying the truth. Now the truth was about to carry the final weight for her. Diddy sat hunched over the table, chains resting against his wrists. The confidence, the persona, the armor he had worn for decades, it had evaporated. He looked smaller now, as though the courtroom itself had taken something from him with each new revelation. His breathing came shallow, sharp. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stared at the surface below him, seeing nothing, hearing nothing except the echo of a world closing in. Then the bailiff's voice cut through the tension with a single word. "All rise." The doors opened. Judge Subramanian entered slowly, carrying only one file, the same thin one he had carried all day, but now its edges were frayed from constant review. He walked with a solemn heaviness, as though even the act of approaching the bench was a weight he needed to shoulder deliberately. Every camera in the room tilted, every person stood taller, every breath stalled. The judge sat down. The courtroom followed, and then for a moment he simply looked at Diddy. No anger, no triumph, no satisfaction. Just the calm, unyielding look of someone who understood that justice was not a choice, but a responsibility. "Mr. Combs," he began, his voice steady but grave, "this court has considered your statements, your appeal, and the newly submitted materials authenticated by federal investigators." The judge's tone dropped lower, almost resonant. "The evidence presented today does not simply raise concern. It raises certainty." Diddy swallowed hard, his throat tightening visibly. Agnifilo placed a hand on his arm, more for comfort than strategy, as if he finally understood that nothing he could say would shift what was coming. The gallery leaned forward as the judge continued. "Throughout this process, you were given opportunities to cooperate. Instead, you chose to manipulate. You chose to interfere. You chose actions that undermine the very foundation of justice." His eyes narrowed slightly. "This court does not take such violations lightly." Cassie's eyes glistened. Her breath caught, trembling. But she didn't look away. The prosecutor stood still, hands clasped behind his back, waiting. The judge's next words felt like the final tightening of a rope. "You tampered with witnesses. You authorized payments intended to influence sworn testimony. You attempted to silence individuals who sought only to tell the truth. Such actions reflect not misunderstanding, but intent." The room stayed silent. the kind of silence that happens right before something irreversible. The judge lifted the file and tapped it once. Mr. Combs, what began as a sentencing review has revealed conduct so severe, so deliberate, that this court must respond accordingly. He paused, letting the gravity settle. The original sentence of 50 months is vacated. Diddy's head snapped up. His breath hitched. The gallery erupted into small gasps. The judge didn't blink. He continued, "Given the evidence presented today and the ongoing risk your actions pose to witnesses and the integrity of these proceedings, this court finds that no lesser sentence would be sufficient." Agnafilo shook his head softly, whispering something like a prayer or a plea, but no words emerged clearly. The judge's gaze stayed locked on Diddy. "Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that Sean Combs is hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The room broke gasps, whispers, a few muffled cries. Reporters scrambled, their fingers flying over keyboards as the words "life without parole" spread through the air like electric shock. Diddy's face twisted, disbelief turning to panic. "No, no, you can't!" He jerked forward, the chains rattling loud enough to echo. "You can't do this to me. I built everything. Order!" the judge thundered, slamming the gavel. But Diddy kept struggling, his voice cracking under the pressure. "They're lying. They set me up. This isn't justice. This is revenge." Two officers stepped in, gripping his arms as he tried to lunge toward the bench. He didn't look powerful anymore. He looked desperate, broken, a man clawing at the last seconds of a life he no longer controlled. Cassie covered her mouth as tears slid silently down her cheeks. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't smiling. She was simply letting go of something she had carried for so long it had become part of her breathing. The judge waited for the chaos to settle, then spoke again, softer but heavier. "This court is adjourned." The gavel struck once more. The officers dragged Diddy toward the side door, his voice echoing as he fought against the inevitable. "You think this ends me? I am the music. I am the—" The door slammed shut. The echo vanished. Outside, the city erupted news anchors, shouting into cameras. People crying, people cheering, crowds forming waves of chaos against barricades. Headlines blasted across screens worldwide before Diddy even reached the transport van. Inside the courthouse, the air finally loosened. Cassie stood slowly. Her attorney whispered, "It's done." But she didn't move. She looked toward the empty chair where Diddy had sat for the last time, and in that moment, the weight on her shoulders lifted not completely, not magically, but enough to breathe again. As the van carrying Diddy pulled away, sirens lit the darkening sky. The city looked different, colder, quieter, as if absorbing the end of an era it once celebrated. His world, his empire, his myth had dissolved into something unavoidable: truth. And sometimes truth is the only sound left when the music finally stops. If you found this breakdown intense and eye-opening, let me know in the comments what moment shocked you the most, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss updates like this.